Hello, everybody. Welcome to our pre-Rosh Hashanah sermon on the subject of clarity in times of uncertainty. I'd like to begin with the Birchat Kohanim, with the priestly blessings. Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe leimer, daber al Aaron v'al banav leimer, keisevarochu es bnei Yisrael amar lahem, yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, yoed Adonai ponav eilecha v'chuneka, Yisa Adonai ponav eilecha, v'yosem lecha shalom, v'somwe shemi al bnei Yisrael v'ani avarachem. Hashanah Tova to all, and welcome to a unique sermon in a very strange and unique year. One of the advantages of being able to do the sermon on Zoom is I'm able to give my sermon to people from all over the country, from all over the world, but especially so that I can say a good yontif and a Shana Tova to my mother, who's, I'm sure, watching from Brooklyn, New York. A good yontif ma, a Shana Tova. You should have a blessed year with good health, with arichas yamim, with tremendous nachas from all of your children, from your grandchildren, and from your great-grandchildren. Although we're by no means out of the woods as far as the corona crisis is concerned, the good news is that things are a lot better than they were when the shutdowns first began. You remember those days back in March, the hoarding and the stockpiling and the lines at the stores and the empty shelves. Back then, someone posted on Craigslist 24 roll pack of toilet paper from Walmart looking to swap for a 4-bedroom house. Toilet paper was a major currency. A few days into the shutdown, one man made the following entry into his diary. He wrote, "Day 3 without any sports. I found a woman sitting on my couch. Apparently, she's my wife. She seems nice." In a similar but different vein, someone said to me, "It's been such a joy being home with my wife all this time. In the span of 6 months, we've caught up on all the things I've done wrong for the past 30 years." Not everyone has been having a hard time with the shutdown. Some people are even loving it. When you think about it, it's a dream come true for the introverts. All public gatherings canceled, mandated social distancing, everybody minding their own business, no physical contact, no random small talk, no forced smiles, especially behind a mask that no one knows if you're smiling or not. For the antisocial, it has been Purim for 6 months. But we're gathered to talk about Rosh Hashanah. My friends, Rosh Hashanah came very early this year. And I don't mean that it fell out earlier in September than in other years. I mean that if Rosh Hashanah is all about hitting the pause button, taking a step back, and re-examining our way of life and our order of priorities, I suggest that for many of us, Rosh Hashanah already started back in March, when COVID-19 came upon our shores and the lockdowns began. So if that's the case, what are the upcoming days all about? Well, for one thing, as the Lubavitcher Rebbe explained, time is not a train of cars hitched to one another, whereby one year is dragged along by the one before it. Every year arrives fresh from our Creator, a year that never was before and will never be again. After every sounding of the shofar, we proclaim, Hayom Haras Holam. Today is the birth of the world, because with the sounding of the shofar, the entirety of creation is renewed. A totally new energy, a new fountain of blessings is about to descend from heaven. As a matter of fact, in many communities, they recite the following prayer on Rosh Hashanah Eve. Let the misfortunes of the past year come to an end, and let the new year begin with blessings. If there ever was a Rosh Hashanah on which we would like to close the book on the year gone by and open that new book of blessings for the year ahead, this is surely one such Rosh Hashanah. When we hear people out there saying, I can't wait for 2020 to be in the rear view mirror because it's been such a crazy year, we Jews, we're not waiting for January 2021. We're getting a fresh start now. So let's do it. Let's tune in. Let's get ready. Let's welcome those new blessings into our lives. How do we do that? Step one is by putting things into proper context and perspective, adopting the right mindset. It is true that the past year was like no other, as the world was hit with a pandemic the likes of which none of us have seen in our lifetimes. Within a matter of weeks, the three main essentials we rely on to live physically stable lives, our health, our prosperity, and our freedom, were all under attack, proving that we could never assume that these things cannot vanish in a moment. Almost instantaneously, in a microscopic virus born in a laboratory or marketplace thousands of miles away, it turned our lives upside down. The virus sent shockwaves of horror and fear across the world as we heard reports of its devastating symptoms and effects. People gasping for air in sheer terror. Paramedics responding to non-stop calls around the clock. Emergency rooms and hospital beds and ICUs completely overwhelmed. Triage happening in hospital hallways and parking lots. People placed on ventilators and forced into comas for weeks and months on end as they fought for their very lives. Doctors and scientists struggling to get a handle on heretofore unseen and an unknown plague. Tens upon tens of thousands of lost lives were lost. Many of the victims spending their final moments alone in a cold and chaotic hospital ward with no one to hold their hand, no one to pray with them, no one to tell them how much they love them. The pain and the sorrow and the grief defy description. Our hearts go out to all those who lost loved ones as we pray for the complete and speedy recovery of those fighting the virus as we speak. Even as the rest of us have been doing our best to adjust to what has been described as the new normal, an overriding sense of fear and anxiety nonetheless continue to pervade our daily lives. To this day, many of us are forced to stay away from our elderly and vulnerable loved ones. No hugs exchanged, no birthdays or milestones shared in person, no new memories and pastimes created. The economy is in total disarray, bordering on recession, if not already in the throes of one. Businesses are closing left and right, millions of people out of work. Borders are closing and then opening and then closing again. Travel for business or for pleasure is at a virtual standstill. Community gatherings and family simchas and sporting events and concerts and dining out and in-person meeting and classes are all severely impaired, if not canceled altogether. Our lives, and for many, our livelihoods, have been totally upended. But what many are perhaps having the most difficult time with is the overriding sense of uncertainty, of simply not knowing what tomorrow has in store. It's what's called anticipatory grief, a heavy sense of foreboding about the future. Will we or someone we love contract the virus, God forbid? If we do get it, how severe will it be? If we get it once, can we get it again? The invisible, unknowable enemy is out there and people are scared. When will it finally be over? When will they have a vaccine? And when they get a vaccine, will it work? And who's going to get it first? When will our kids be able to go back to normal school? When will we be able to resume holding prayers indoors? What about Torah classes in person? What will our children or our grandchildren's weddings look like? What long-term financial impact will this have on us? What will life be like once it's all over? We don't know. We just don't know. And even those who claim to know don't really know. 8 short months ago, 21st century society was capable of knowing virtually anything and everything. With all the advancement in artificial intelligence, mapping out of the genome, genetic engineering, quantum computers, we had the world fully under control. As Moses said to our ancestors, you will reach a point where you will say to yourselves, my strength and my ingenuity, the work of my hands has given me all this mastery and all of this success. That's where we were. We were the ultimate masters of the universe. But now, we can control a microscopic virus the size of a picometer. That's 1/1,000,000th of a meter. The same is true of our personal lives. 8 months ago, we could plan, we can organize, we could anticipate, we could schedule whatever or whenever. Between Google and Siri, we had the world at our fingertips. And now we have no idea what's going to be, when it's going to be, how it's going to be. It's difficult. It's very difficult to be fully present in anything when there's so much uncertainty. I think we're all familiar with the Yiddish expression, a Mensch tracht und Gott lacht. Man plans and God laughs. Now, I don't know that God is laughing, but he's definitely doing something. While we cannot begin to know God's reason for anything, I think it's safe to say that he's trying to get our attention. Look, between the pandemic and the shutdowns and the racial tension and the violence on the streets and the divisive election, I don't think there's any question that something momentous and consequential is happening in the world right now. We are living through historic times. The question for us as Jews entering into a fresh new year is how we process it all, and more importantly, how we respond to it. Last week marked the 19th anniversary of September 11th, 2001, when 2 planes flown by al-Qaeda terrorists crashed into the Twin Towers, sending the United States and the entire world into a state of panic and chaos. Within an hour of the attack, the mighty towers came tumbling down in a twisted heap of metal and ash, killing thousands and terrifying millions. Years later, an aspiring journalist named Sheldon Dornstein decided to track down some of the professionals who had been involved in the designing and building of the towers. Now, although the main architect, Minoru Yamasaki, had long since died, some members of his team were still living. Among them, a man by the name of Hyman Brown, who had started out as a young apprentice under Yamasaki and had worked his way up to become the project engineer of the construction of the World Trade Center. After some investigating, Sheldon Dornstein was finally able to track down Mr. Brown, who was retired and living in Israel of all places. And after Dornstein pushed for an interview, Brown acquiesced. And during the interview, he described what a thrill it was to have been recruited for this historic project and the pride he took in building the Twin Towers. After a while, Sheldon Dornstein asked Hyman Brown a pointed question. How did you feel when you saw the towers come crashing down? As one who played a major role in designing and building them, what went through your mind? Brown was pensive for a moment and then said, you know, even as a kid, I loved building things. Having learned in Hebrew school that God created the world, I enjoyed the opportunity to play God, designing huge projects and seeing them go up hundreds of thousands of feet in the air. I began to visualize myself as something of a godlike figure. It was a rush like no other. When we drew up the blueprints for the Twin Towers, we believed if anything built by human beings was invincible, it was those towers. We built them to withstand any force imaginable. But then on September 11th morning, as I watched in horrified disbelief the way the South Tower collapsed onto itself, and then 30 minutes later, the North Tower right with it, beyond being devastated, something else happened to me. Even as I understood from an engineering point of view how they went down, I was humbled to my core. In that split second, it dawned on me how small we really are and how great and big God is. As omniscient, all-powerful, and in control as we may think we are, the truth is we aren't. Just as my brilliant and indomitable creations are subject to his whim, so am I. He then went on to say in this interview, I'm a Jew. Up until 9/11, my religious affiliation consisted of a yearly donation to the Jewish National Fund and attendance at high holiday services. But since that day, everything has changed. I realized that the best way to attach myself to the Almighty is truly all-knowing and all-powerful, is through the observance and the study of his Torah. At first, it was very hard for me. I was used to being in control and not having my life dictated by a supernatural rational set of rules. But after learning more and gaining a deeper understanding of the commandments, I'm first beginning to comprehend the meaning of true greatness. My friends, as we live through these historic times, we can limit our focus to the latest offerings on Netflix, to exchanging outrageous memes and videos on TikTok and Instagram, to watching the 24-hour news cycle, to getting geared up for the presidential debates, all of which is good and fine if it helps create useful diversions. But with Rosh Hashanah now upon us, however, let's not forfeit the opportunity. Let's not miss out on the huge benefits. You heard me right, the benefits that these epic, life-changing moments have to offer. The greatest benefits being a new sense of clarity in the face of all the uncertainty. Perhaps the most clarifying point to make is that it is not our sense of certainty that has been upset by the pandemic. It is only our illusion of certainty that has been shaken up. In reality, no matter what we may happen in our lives, whether we are experiencing pandemic or paradise, we are in a perpetual state of crisis, if you will, a crisis of dependence on the Almighty's providence and grace. But that shouldn't be frightening. That should be comforting. That should be reassuring. The real truth is that we don't have any more or any less certainty this year than we had in any previous year. What we do have this year, perhaps more than in the past, is a starker sense of awareness and realization of this truth. We are seeing our dependence on God play out before our very eyes in real time. As the Rebbe put it, sometimes you see that things have been taken out of your hands and are following a supernatural order. At that point, let go of the steering wheel. Do your best at what you have to do, and then relax and trust him. After all, he runs an entire universe. When we finally appreciate that there's a lot less under our control than we thought, that our fate is in the hands of a loving God who knows what's best for us, that is when we first become capable of receiving the benefits and the blessings to be derived from our situations. We know that God often tests us. The Torah is replete with accounts of inspirational figures whose faith and devotion were tested under the most trying circumstances. But for us Jews, the word test is another way of saying summons. If God is testing us, it's not just for the heck of it. It's his way of summoning us to something greater for ourselves and for our future generations. So rather than be anxious and fearful, let us open ourselves up to the possibility of something new, of something different, indeed something better. Maybe all this is temporary. Maybe it will go on for quite a while longer. Maybe parts of it will even become permanent. For all we know, maybe the new normal will turn out to be far better than the old one. Whatever it is, let's roll with it. Let's change the paradigm to a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at life, a new way of interacting with God and with our fellow man, a new way of living, a new way of being. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl describes the moment in Auschwitz when he developed what came to be known as meaning therapy. He was worrying one day if he should trade his last cigarette for a bowl of soup. He wondered how he would work with a vicious new foreman. And suddenly he grew disgusted with his degraded, meaningless life. He realized that if he would survive that horrible darkness, he would need to rediscover purpose to his existence. So he began to imagine himself giving lectures after the war, describing what he had been through. That's right. While there in the concentration camp, he actually visualized himself standing up there in lecture halls presenting his ideas. He created real goals for himself, even as he was unsure if he would ever live to pursue them. But it was at that moment, the moment that he envisioned a different reality than the one that he was in, that he was able to rise above his suffering. He went on to write, even when confronted with a hopeless situation, when facing a fate that cannot be changed, even there, we may also find meaning in life. So if we can visualize and anticipate the better days to come, we'd be giving ourselves every best chance of reaching them. When we look at our challenges as opportunities and seek new meaning in our lives, we don't merely survive our ordeals, we thrive in the face of them. In 2005, the late Steve Jobs delivered a commencement address at Stanford University that has now been seen by more than 40 million people on YouTube. In it, he describes 3 crushing blows in his life: dropping out of college, being fired by the company he had founded, Apple, and being diagnosed with cancer. Each one, he said, had led to something important and positive. He described how his parents invested their life savings so that he can go to Reed College. But 6 months into his first semester, he dropped out. At that point, he didn't have a dorm room, so he slept on the floor in a friend's room. He returned Coke bottles for 5-cent deposits to buy food. He walked 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal at the Hare Krishna temple. Being a dropout, he was able to attend classes that were not on the mandated list. He chose Reed's course in calligraphy. In the process, he learned all about typography, although at the time it didn't seem what he would need in any practical use. 10 years later, when designing the Mac computer, it all came back to him. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. Had he not taken that course, the Mac would not have had the multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows ended up copying the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have had them. In 1985, Jobs was fired from Apple, the company he co-founded from scratch in his parents' garage 11 years earlier, building it into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. It was a public humiliation. He considered running away from it all. But then he realized he still had his passion. He started another company called Next, and then another company called Pixar, where he met the love of his life, who would become his wife. Pixar went on to become the most successful animation studio in the world. And what happened with Next? Apple bought Next. So he returned to Apple. And the technology he developed at Next turned out to be the key to Apple's emergence as the juggernaut it is to this day. His diagnosis with pancreatic cancer, devastating though it was, inspired him to be all the more thankful for each day. As he said that day to the Stanford graduates, if you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll be right. So each day ask yourself, if today were the last day of your life, would you want to do what you're about to do today? If the answer is no for too many days in a row, it means you need to change something. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Rather than allow traumatic experiences to be nothing more than just that, Steve Jobs tried to turn them into opportunities to create something new. Few could have rebounded after being dismissed from their own company, and fewer still could have achieved the transformation he did at Apple when he came back, creating the iPod, and then the iPhone, and then the iPad. But the lessons are there to be learned. Sometimes we have to wait for the dark clouds to part before the blessings can rain down upon us. In 1978, a young yeshiva and college graduate named Jonathan Sachs visited the Lubavitcher Rebbe to ask his advice on which career path he should choose. As was customary, he wrote an introductory note and presented it to the Rebbe at the start of the audience. And in this note, he presented three options, A, B, or C, expecting the Rebbe to tell him which of the three was best for him. The options were to become a lawyer, or as they say in England, a barrister, or to become an economist, or to become a philosopher. The Rebbe read out the list and said, no to the first, no to the second, and no to the third. He nixed all three. Your mission, he said, is to train rabbis at the London School of Jewish Studies and to become a congregational rabbi yourself. So imagine you're dreaming of becoming a famous philosopher, a lawyer, an economist. No, you're going to become a rabbi. Jonathan Sachs was taken aback. That wasn't what he had thought where his life was headed. Nevertheless, he asked the Rebbe for guidance, and this was clear direction that he was given. So overnight, he found himself saying goodbye to all of his aspirations, to everything for which he had trained. Talk about adjusting and creating a new paradigm. Well, as you probably know, Rabbi Sachs, or I should say Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, went on to become the chief rabbi of Great Britain and one of the most eloquent and prolific rabbinical figures of our time. When Rabbi Sachs shared this story that I just told you at the International Convention of Chabad Rabbis in 2011, he wrapped up with the following punchline. The strange thing is, he said, that ultimately I fulfilled all those three ambitions despite walking in the opposite direction. I became an honorary barrister of the Inner Temple and delivered a law lecture in front of 600 barristers and the Lord Chief Justice. I delivered Britain's two leading economic lectures, the Mayas Lecture and the Halleck Lecture at the Institute of Economic Affairs. And I became a fellow of my Cambridge College and philosophy professor at several universities. It was only in retrospect that I discovered that the Rebbe was not telling me to give up on my career plans. He was simply charting a different route, and a more beneficial one at that. My friends, rather than get all stumped when our best laid plans are impeded, let us be open to embarking upon the new paths in front of us. It may turn out to give you everything you wanted and a whole lot more. One of the things we've been hearing people say over and over throughout this crisis is we're all in the same boat. Everyone in the world, we're all in the same boat. I don't know about that. We're all weathering the same storm, but the boats can be very different. Sean Acker is a best-selling Harvard professor. He often tells his audience the following story. Imagine for a moment, and all of you out there with me, think about the same question. Imagine for a moment that you walk into a bank. There are 50 other people in the bank. A bank robber walks in and fires his weapon once. You are shot in the right arm. Now, if you're describing this event to your friends and coworkers the next day, would you describe yourself as being lucky or unlucky? So usually when Acker presents the scenario, his audience responds with a 70-30 split. Most people, the 70% would answer that it was unfortunate. Here I am, I'm minding my own business, I'm running a simple errand, and suddenly my arm gets a bullet in it. That's terrible. I'm the only one to get shot. It's unfortunate. But 30% of the audience, on the other hand, come to a conclusion that it's a fortunate event. I could have been shot in my head. I could have been shot in my heart. I could have died yesterday. 50 people were in the room and no one died. It's a miracle. Now, what's the difference? It's the same story. Where does the ability to see the glass as half full come from? The answer is that we all tell ourselves stories on a daily basis. Every one of us continue to tell ourselves stories. When faced with a situation, we subconsciously present ourselves with various counter stories that compare what could have happened with what actually happened. Those whose counter stories was, I'm the only schlemazel who got shot, logically believe that being shot in the arm is unfortunate. But those that utilize a different basis of comparative thinking say, I could have been killed, but I survived. I'm still here to enjoy my family, my children, my grandchildren. Actually viewing being shot in the arm as something positive. The comparison we create for life scenarios is what determines our level of happiness and satisfaction, our satisfaction level in life itself. Our ability to construct helpful counterfacts to a given set of circumstances is what determines whether we will become emotionally paralyzed by those circumstances or well adjusted to them. Judaism teaches us to always develop positive counterfacts. You survive a life-threatening situation, what do? You go up to the Torah and you recite a blessing of thanks called Hagomel. So you say, well, if God hadn't put me in that horrible situation in the first place, I get that. But that's not the Jewish way. We create positive counterfacts. Challenges related to the pandemic, we all have them. Few of us have gotten off scot-free. And we shouldn't be in denial about that. We need to acknowledge our losses and allow ourselves to feel the pain of those losses, even shed tears if need be. But then there comes a time to pivot, to move on to the next step, which is to be grateful for what we do have. You're stuck at home, be thankful for being able to shelter with air conditioning. You have cabin fever, thank God you're not stuck in a hospital room somewhere. You're cooped up with your spouse, be grateful that you have a spouse. Your kids aren't in school, be happy that there are opportunities to learn online. You can't be in the company of some of your loved ones, especially your elderly loved ones. You can see them and talk to them on FaceTime, on Zoom. Imagine if this happened in the days before the internet. Counterfacts. These are what enables us to be among the 30% who see the glass as half full. If we make gratitude the color upon which we paint the new normal, we will be so much happier for it. One of the Rebbe's favorite mottos through the years was Tracht gut, wird sein gut. Think good, and it will be good. And he would further explain that worrying does not empty tomorrow of its troubles, but it does empty today of its strengths. Seeing the positive under difficult circumstances takes practice, but it's a skill that even the most pessimistic among us are capable of developing if we work on it. In the early days of the shutdown, when there were those long lines snaking around the markets and superstores, a woman shared her experience while standing online outside Costco one afternoon. She's standing in front of Costco. There's a long line, and in front of her was an older man. and she surmised that he was in his mid-80s. And she was struggling to breathe behind the mask. She found herself feeling sorry for this elderly fellow patron in front of her. She and her brother had been doing the shopping for their parents, who were far younger than this man. And she wondered what he was doing in this crowded warehouse, being in that vulnerable age group that he was. Maybe he didn't have children. Maybe they lived far away. Maybe he didn't know that there were special senior hours. And when she finished her shopping and she was going to check out, she found herself once again behind the same elderly gentleman. As he finished paying for his groceries and she was about to move beyond the 6-foot marker between them, she noticed that he wasn't moving forward. Above his mask, his eyes looked misty, and although his voice was muffled, she could clearly hear him say to the cashier, "Thank you so much for working today. I'm so grateful to you." And then he turned to the person packing up his cart and repeated the same thing. "Thank you so much. I appreciate that you are here working today so that we can buy our groceries. Stay safe. Be healthy. Thank you so much." And as he slowly pushed his cart away, she saw him go out of his way, head over to the customer service desk. "Thank you for coming in today." And suddenly, stunned out of her pity for this man, she realized that she was witnessing a little piece of greatness. Greatness that can only come from struggling through many stages of life and practicing gratitude every step of the way. "I'm sure he didn't give it all that much thought," the woman said. It was clear that saying thank you and appreciating the people around him was second nature to him. He was used to lifting his head up and noticing the beauty around him. The humility, the sweetness of simple gratitude is what often separates the joyful from the woeful. Many of you may have seen the video clip that went viral of an 88-year-old man in Watertown, Massachusetts, being lifted in a bucket truck. Before the pandemic, Nick Avdikis used to visit his wife, Marion, every day at the Maristel Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, which he had been living for the last year due to ill health. And he would stay with her all day, hardly leaving her side. But back in April, when it was discovered that the virus presented a mortal threat to the residents of senior facilities, the center put a complete stop to all visitations. Having to stay away from his wife of 61 years took an emotional toll on Nick. It pained his family to see him so upset. So with the help of friends, they devised an unconventional plan to get the couple back together. They arranged to have a truck with a bucket lift, we used to call it cherry picker, parked outside Marist Hill. And they strapped this 80-some-odd-year-old man, Nick, into a harness inside the bucket, and then slowly hoisted him 3 stories up. As Nick would later say, they could have lifted me 10 stories, it wouldn't have bothered me. They lifted him to a screened window, on the other side of which was the woman who had spent the last 6 decades of his life. It was the first time he saw her face to face in weeks. It was awesome. It was emotional on so many different levels. The couple talked for around 20 minutes, and at one point, Nick placed his hand on the window, and he put up a note, and it simply said, "I love you, sweetheart." Sometimes, the most beautiful sights are right in front of us. They're in front of us in the grocery store line. They are shining through the shaking hands pressed against nursing home windows. They are around our Shabbat table on a Friday night. Perhaps one of the many silver linings to be found within the cloud of the coronavirus is the degree in which it has enabled us to lift our eyes off the ground and see the beauty that is always around us. You know, I've heard many people tell me that they've been more Jewishly motivated and inspired over the past few months than ever before. Although Judaism finds its fullest expression through participation with the community, attendance at synagogue and so on, as individuals and families now had to navigate the prayers and rituals on their own, they've been extra attentive to things. Many have been observing Shabbat more carefully than before, as their uncluttered calendars have allowed them to do so now. After all, when we're already sheltering in place, what's our excuse not to? Maybe this too is part of the plan. Maybe for now, God wants a more personal Judaism from us, the kind that can only take place in our homes. Imperfect, perhaps, but very much our own. Even so, when this trying and challenging time is over, when the schools and the restaurants and the stadiums and the theaters fully open back up, when we no longer to fear the warmth of a handshake or the closeness of friends, will life just go back to the way it was, or will something have changed? Will we look at family and community and society and humanity differently? Will some lasting good emerge from all this anxiety and pain? I hope so. I think so. I really do. One thing is for sure. We will be talking about this period of time for the rest of our lives. Our children will one day be telling their grandchildren about it. How we write this story, how we write this chapter, the stories we and they will tell is up to us now. We will always remember how we reacted to these events, whether they made us better or bitter, whether they made us selfless or selfish. The good news is that we are fortunate to have a treasure trove of wisdom to guide us along. In Ethics of Our Fathers, our sages tell us the world stands on three pillars: on Torah, Avoda, and Gemilas Chasadim. On Torah, on the service of God, and on deeds of loving kindness. Imagine that the world sits upon a three-legged table. If one leg is missing or broken, the table cannot stand. When the world around us is teetering and tottering, we have the ability to stabilize it by working on these three spiritual connections, these three legs, to keep ourselves on firm footing, even as the table begins to wobble. Firstly, each of us have enormous potential. So much of it is untapped. To develop this potential, we need to constantly be learning, seeking wisdom, looking for truth. And this is why the study of Torah is so important. It gives us clarity. We need that growth. One of life's greatest pleasures is gaining insight and making changes that transform our lives. When we explore Torah's age-old teachings, when we choose to live by its timeless mitzvot, by its values, by its ethics, our entire world is transformed. Bringing the Torah to life uplifts the world and keeps it going. So for this new year, sign up for some classes, for some courses, for some lectures. You'll go after this talk on jewishacademy.com and see our fall semester. Or go and buy some new Jewish books and make Torah study a regular exercise. Secondly, we have a neshama, the gift of a godly soul. But how do we nourish that soul? The answer is by building a relationship with the Almighty. We connect to God through the second leg upon which the world stands, through that service of the heart, through prayer. When we pray, we open up gates in the heavens above. We call out to God through all the different phases and stages of our lives. And we express gratitude, and we ask for healing. And we speak to our Father in heaven about any and every care we may have. And we can pray in any language. Prayer is intimate. It's between ourselves and our Creator. The channels are there. It's up to us to connect to God through our heart and through our words. And finally, connecting with other human beings is the third leg that we stand on. Chesed, kindness, good deeds are the means through which we build connection. We all need good friends and a loving family. Loneliness is toxic. The world cannot survive if hatred eats away at mankind. The sages have given us the secret to keeping relationships and mankind alive. Chesed, acts of loving kindness. In 1991, a young man by the name of Jay Feinberg was in his first year of law school when he was diagnosed with leukemia. His family was told that he would need a bone marrow transplant to survive, but there were no matching donors in his family or in the entire national registry. For 4 years, as Jay's health continued to deteriorate, his family conducted bone marrow drives all over the world in search of a match. They tested 60,000 donors. They found matches for hundreds of patients along the way, but none were a match for Jay, and time was running out. As Jay's condition got worse and worse, people were starting to lose hope. Two of Jay's friends, Benji Merzel and Amir Gutman of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, refused to give up hope, and they organized another drive in their hometown. There was a young lady from Illinois. Her name was Becky Fabisoff. She volunteered at the drive, but due to her fear of needles, decided not to get tested herself. As the drive was packing up the end of the day, after having tested 130 new people, the volunteers were hoping against hope that one would turn out to be Jay's life-saving match. In the last moment, Becky says to herself, it's ridiculous. I've come this far to help out and I'm not getting tested myself. So she overcame her fear and she got tested. Well, I imagine you guessed it. She turned out to be Jay's perfect match. At the very last drive for Jay, after 60,000 unsuccessful tests, in that final moment, a match was found in Milwaukee within the body of a volunteer from Illinois. The transplant, which took place a short time later at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in Seattle, was a success, and Jay Feinberg got a new lease of life. But that's not where the story ends. When he recovered, Jay Feinberg was determined to ensure that others would not have to wait so long for a transplant or risk not finding a match at all. So instead of returning to law school, he used his own experience to found an organization called Gift of Life, dedicated to educating and encouraging people to add themselves to the bone marrow registry and to improve the efficiency of finding matches and coordinating transplants within the Jewish community and beyond. This year marks the 25th anniversary of Jay Feinberg's transplant. Since that time, Gift of Life has conducted over 10,500 bone marrow drives in 49 countries. It has more than 375,000 registered donors. It has found 17,888 matches and has facilitated 3,645 transplants. Beyond simply feeling grateful to be alive, Jay put his gratitude into action with a priceless gift to humanity and to the Jewish people. Now think about all the different pieces that came together and what came about as a result. A determined family relentless in searching for a match. Two friends refusing to give up hope. One young lady overcoming a phobia to do an act of kindness that not only saved one man's life, but by extension saved the lives of thousands and has given hopes to leukemia patients around the world. My friends, amazing things happen when we overcome our own inhibitions, leaving our comfort zones and reach outside ourselves to do something kind for others. Throughout this crisis, we have heard countless stories of extraordinary people who put their own safety and challenges aside to become God's heroic angels, performing spectacular acts of goodness and kindness. I think of the thousands who risked exposure to the virus, putting their own lives in grave danger to treat those who were stricken. The first responders, the doctors, the nurses, right there on the front lines. I think of the millions who volunteered to do a variety of tasks, from delivering medicines, shopping for those who could not, to speaking to the lonely and isolated on the phone or online. I think of the previously ill who, rather than hibernate comfortably in their recovery, chose to line up at blood centers to donate plasma and pay their miracle forward. I think of a group of Hasidic men who delivered thousands of iPads to coronavirus patients in New York City hospitals to let them connect to their families who were not allowed to visit. I think of the young family who set up their own Seder table on Passover Eve outside the widow of an elderly Holocaust survivor so that he wouldn't be alone on that special night. I think of those who incurred great personal expense to continue paying their workers during the shutdown. And I think of the generosity of many, many people who have been digging deep into their own pockets to ensure that those hit hardest can continue to be safe and taken care of. These gestures of selflessness are indeed expressions of the goodness and godliness that can be found within each and every one of us. On a personal note, locally, throughout this crisis, Chabad has been there as a vital resource, especially for those in our community hit hardest by the effects of the pandemic. People out of work or otherwise in a bad way have been able to turn to us for all forms of support, including financial. But it's not thanks to us. It's thanks to the generosity of you out there. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for making us the messengers to spread the kindness, to spread the love, to spread the chesed. If you'd like to participate in this vital and timely act of tzedakah and chesed, especially during this Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur time, please go after this talk to Chabad, Conejo.com. Conejo is spelled CONEJO.com/appeal. And do your mitzvah of tzedakah. Indeed, these days, there are endless opportunities to perform chesed at home, in the community, and beyond. We should constantly be asking ourselves, what kindness can I do today? How can I think beyond myself? Who needs a smile today, a good word? Who can I call to let them know that I'm thinking about them? How can I bring joy to another human being in the middle of this mess? If you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm just too upset and overwhelmed with my own problems right now to think about someone else, remember this: the happiest people are those who give to others. The solution to your distress does not lie in closing yourself off, but in opening yourself up. When you provide assistance or do something to lift the spirit of another, your own spirit is uplifted in the process. During one of the very chaotic days in the New York hospital in the early days of the outbreak of the virus, there was a doctor who found himself running from one crisis situation to the other. And later that night, he posted the following on Facebook. Today, in the middle of all the madness, there was a 100-year-old Hasidic lady with COVID pneumonia. I was desperate to send her home so she wouldn't die in the hospital, but her blood pressure dropped, so we had to keep her. For an hour straight, her son kept on calling me to find out how she was doing. I finally said to him, look, your mother is 100 years old. Your mother has pneumonia in both lungs. How is she doing? She's not good. She's not doing well. He then said he wanted to talk to her. I said, you can't. I'm too busy here. I can't be setting up phone conversations right now. He called me back 10 minutes later. I said, listen, sir, your mother is not conscious anymore. He said, I understand, but it's important that I do a prayer for her. Could you please hold the speaker of the phone to her ear? I had 10 other pressing things to do, but I stopped what I was doing out of respect for this 100-year-old woman. I put my cell phone on speaker and I said, okay, talk. And he started the prayer of the dead. And he began to cry. He could barely get the words out. I then looked over and I saw that this woman had numbers tattooed on her arm. The man on the phone was crying for his mother. And he began saying the Shema, which I remembered from my youth. It woke up an emotion in me that I had long forgotten. And I found myself reciting the Shema along with this man over the bedside of a 100-year-old woman with the tattoos on her arm from a concentration camp. When he was done, the man on the phone thanked me and blessed me. And I broke down crying. And I said, no, thank you. Thank you. Amidst the frenzy and pandemonium of a hospital ward in crisis, a quiet moment of holiness penetrates the soul of a Jew, connecting him to his Father in heaven, inspiring him to utter a prayer of his own. No matter what, no matter where, a mitzvah has a way of lighting up the world with love and with hope. It is true that there are many things over which we have little or no control. On the other hand, we often get a glimpse of how our actions have the power to keep the world standing on its axis, to build spiritual connections, to discover Torah's wisdom and get more in touch with your inner self. Use prayer to build a bridge to God and make a difference in the life of another. Strengthen your relationships. Do acts of kindness today. And when this is all over, we will have more meaningful lives because of the adjustments that we will have made at this time. Perhaps everything the world has been going through is not so much the pressing of the proverbial pause button, but maybe it's the reset button. Perhaps the world will never fully return to its pre-COVID-19 state, but rather than that notion getting us upset, perhaps it should get us excited instead. Judaism's response is always one of hope, and that's because we are assured that all roads, however rough, lead to the complete redemption through Mashiach, through the Messiah. This resolute optimism is based on biblical guarantees, and it's what has enabled the Jewish people to weather all the crises of our long and challenging history. For all we know, the pandemic may be accelerating the speed of humanity's train down the track toward that new era of goodness, that new era of peace and stability and enlightenment. We know that Yeshua's Hashem Keheres Ayin, God's salvation can happen in the blink of an eye. How long did it take for a tiny virus to turn the entire world upside down? Well, the good and the positive can happen just as quickly, if not quicker still. A total makeover. The key for us is to set aside our skepticism and our pessimism and our cynicism to try and relocate the pure faith that resides in each of our souls. And then doing what Viktor Frankl did amidst the greatest darkness. Actually visualize a very different reality. Because it is only when we, Am Yisrael, the nation that received this prophecy, makes it a real goal, one that we vividly see playing out in our mind's eye, that we will merit to bring it to fruition. As Elijah the prophet will appear on the scene to inform us that the time is at hand. I'd like to conclude with this short story. It's a story about a young family, Alan and Sherry Lussman, and their daughter Lisa. Lisa was 6 years old and attending Hebrew school, but only because her friend was going and Lisa wanted to go as well. Figuring that she'd simply be coming home with harmless Hanukkah cookies and cute dip the apple in the honey songs, Lisa's parents were not prepared for the excitement with which this little girl took everything she was learning. Alan in particular was content with his lifestyle and was not interested in having his routine altered in any way. He was happy with his very limited knowledge of Hebrew, Jewish concept. That was the extent of what he wanted for his child. So it was starting to get on his nerves when Lisa would go on about the Torah portion and this mitzvah and this tradition. At times, they had to try and temper her enthusiasm for her Jewish studies because it was simply not where they were. One day, as Passover was coming, Lisa comes bursting through the door with a smile from ear to ear. She's holding up her most recent project, a painted plastic cup of Elijah. A cup of Elijah. Mommy, can we use it for our Passover Seder? Sherry pretended to be excited. Wow, it's beautiful. And she assured us, sure, we'll use it for the Seder. The only problem was they weren't planning on having a Seder. Sherry knew that her husband would not be interested in having one, let alone allowing their daughter to become emotionally involved in another religious experience. But even so, Sherry didn't want to deflate her daughter's Passover balloon, and because it was flying high, especially with her handcrafted cup for Elijah. And as predicted, Alan was not up for this Seder idea. But as his daughter listened from a distance to the conversation he and his wife were having, he could not help but be moved by her innocent desire for a Passover Seder. So he reluctantly agreed, hoping that Lisa would not expect the same ceremony year after year. When Sherry told the daughter that they would in fact be displaying her cup of Elijah at the Seder, her smile was too wide for her tiny face to hold. And the night finally arrived. Alan did his best to play his role. He put on a small kippah for the occasion. When urged by his wife to get into it and be animated about the steps, he again said, why are we going along with this charade? But she gave him such a stare. Okay. He made the blessings on the wine. He pretended to care about the 4 questions that Lisa read from her sheet. He listened as she sang, "Dai, dai, yenu." He did the dipping. He ate some lettuce. He ate some horseradish. He crunched on some matzah. He had his dinner, and the hour was getting late. He stands up and he tells his wife and daughter, time to go to sleep. Time to go to sleep. But what about the cup of Elijah, Lisa said. The cup of Elijah. We didn't do the cup of Elijah. At this point, Alan was at his wit's end. In his mind, he'd gone way beyond the call of duty. He played the Passover game long enough. He was tired. He wanted to go to sleep. To him, this whole Elijah thing was no more of a reality than the tooth fairy. Allowing his child to think otherwise was one thing, but he had enough with playing along with it. He was fed up. That's it. I'm going upstairs. I have work tomorrow. I have a busy day ahead of me. Lisa started to mouth her protest. I need Elijah's cup, Elijah's cup. He was so angry, Alan. He grabbed that cup of Elijah, and to his daughter's horror, he threw it on the floor and he darted off. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Alan had been twisting and turning since he went to bed, unable to sleep. He felt terrible about what happened earlier that evening. He got out of bed to check on his little girl. But when he looked into his daughter's bedroom, he was surprised to see that her bed was empty. And slowly he walked down the stairs to see maybe she fell asleep on the couch. But as he reached the bottom of the stairs and he walked into the living room, his heart nearly broke. There she stood, her little face pressed up against the window, with tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked up towards him. What's wrong, Lisa? Why are you up? Lisa didn't answer. She just pointed out the window. What? What is it, Lisa? What are you looking at? Why don't you go back to sleep? Daddy, don't you see him? Don't you see him, Daddy? He's waiting right there by the door for us to open it for him. She then turned back to her father and fell into his arms, sobbing deeply. And Alan cried along with her. Shaking his head in disbelief, he looked out the window. And he would later say, although I saw nothing, at that moment, I believed with all my heart that she really did see him. I believe my precious girl saw Elijah. And indeed, that ice-melting moment proved to be a profound turning point for the Lustman family as Alan and Sherry adopted a new openness to Judaism and Jewish practice. My dear friends, if only we can all let our guards down just a little and return to that sweet state of innocence, perhaps we too can have that vision of Elijah at our doorstep. perhaps within the sounding of the shofar this year, we can hear the promise of a new world. And if we can envision it with clarity and faith, if we can hear it, if we can see it, he will come. May it be speedily in our days. Shana Tova. Thank you for joining me. And I'll see you all next Thursday at the same time for a Yom Kippur sermon. Shana Tova Masuka. May you all have a blessed year, a happy year, a healthy year, one in which indeed we see open and revealed miracles.